Okay.
Unrelated.
No
Okay.
problem.
Cool.
All right, so let's do, let's see. Let's just take a look at our agenda. We haven't been using that so religiously lately.
Yeah, I believe all it's on this time is where we want the actual, like where we want this document to go, and then dive into the port object and basic questions.
Let's take
All right.
I don't know if we ever actually went into the class, like the class that is handling all of the different documents. I don't know if we ever went into that last time.
No, I
was
don't
trying to
think
read through it a bit this morning.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about that over time. There's a little bit more. We can definitely talk about that. Another thing that I was starting to work on over the weekend are just some of the backlog of issues for improving the wizard. And
I need to make some of those issues. God damn. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That seems like a good place to put the file. I didn't realize that's something that probably happened after I left. Okay. I didn't have a chance to watch the video.
No worries. I don't think we covered that much more, but there were a couple logistics.
Okay. Probably have these recorded at least. So we could look for those if we need to.
Yeah.
No, I think there are a couple of weeks we didn't have the meeting.
Oh, okay. That's definitely possible.
Okay.
So, I don't know, Bryce, actually, you might have some ideas on this. I don't know. I was just talking about how we were still having some deliverability problems with SendGrid. I'm trying to decide if the next tier that would give us a dedicated IP is $90. Do you have any experience with any transactional email services?
I don't. I don't have a ton of experience with that.
Okay, it's not as much of a coding thing anyway. I was just curious.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I was just looking at all my open tabs and it's like, oh.
What tier are we on now?
We're on the essentials tier, the $15 tier. So it goes from 15 to 90.
Weird.
And questions like, do we change providers? Do we upgrade? I think we can afford $90 a month, actually, probably for a long-term thing.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to add in here, like looking at wizard handling. More of an interface thing I'd love to talk about with people. We have some time. Are there other things people want to add to the agenda? Whether it's something we do today or not?
I do have some. I want to go continue our discussion about the merging of the repositories and all that. So, but that's going to take quite a while. Do we have time today? Do you have to leave early?
I have to leave at noon. So I know sometimes we go till like 12:30, but I won't be able to do that today.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna just put like a sub bullet, like what are YAML files?
Also, those roles that you were talking about, if that's something you want to discuss. I know you posted about roles, and that looked really exciting.
Yeah, it's kind of, to me, those are tied together. That's actually, because that's the code that's working out with the wizard. And that's why I asked that question. It was like, I'm about to implement this thing, but what would be really nice is to know what are all the roles people could have that people could choose from here.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
So maybe that's not a discussion right now. And the other thought was like the data export import object for DocAssemble.
Oh, that's a great thing to remember too, because yeah, again, that also seems something I've been thinking about. It's a half-finished idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, we basically want to polish like all these things that are tied into things we've kind of like done like a really hard coded way we can make more flexible and better and easier to interact with.
Right.
Saying
And-
quartz object. Okay, that wasn't what I was thinking of. AL document class. I think I want to add that too.
Okay. We were talking about the quartz object. We talked about it last time, and we're trying to understand something about its API, something about how to use it, abstract it. I don't remember. I'd have to watch the video probably.
Okay.
But we had a discussion while you were there that led me at least to say that's something I'd like to take a deeper look at.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
but without looking at the video, and unless someone else can remember, I don't know what. I'm just glad
think-
it's in a video.
I think I remember remember it, but it's definitely tied to what I want to continue to discuss today.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Oh, about like how other
yeah,
people,
I
people
can.
using the library otherwise, just to sum it up so that it's clear what it's about.
Yeah, so then-
how other libraries might be able to utilize it.
Right.
Like how would they access it and change it in order to make it work for their courts, right? So like specifically, how would they use its capabilities and in with their courts as opposed to the Massachusetts courts? Like, do they all have emails? Do they all have like, I don't know, like what parts of it are? Anyway, that was the discussion about that particular thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's a more detailed discussion. Before we go there, I still would like to have to finish our discussion about the higher level structure, and then from there we can dive deeper and deeper into more details. Should I share my screen?
Sure.
Is that what we want to be? Is there anything that we feel is super urgent or that we want to make sure not to miss
Let's
this
give-
week?
Let's give like 10 minutes for this discussion. I'd love to have people see what I was doing with the wizard to give feedback. But before we jump on anything, are there other data import export? I think like a great topic for us to introduce.
Super excited.
Actually curious, Bryce, if that might be good next project for you, but it might require more exposure and experience to the way DocAssemble handles things, but that might make it like a lot easier for you. So I'm not sure if you should play around. But yeah,
I would be willing to like collaborate on that if that would help. That
That
move forward.
would help. I feel like a data import expert would also just be useful for me for like the e-filing stuff and to grab
yeah,
everything. So
That's
yeah,
what
so
I was
even if I can sort of just treat it as like cannonball into DocAssemble stuff, where right now I've sort of just been like dabbling a little bit and doing enough or learning enough to know what I need to do. But yeah, you're right. Like I think yeah. Sorry. If Michelle, if you're willing to like sort of help me with some DocAssemble stuff, maybe like some deeper questions, then yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay, cool. I don't
and
know,
so
what do you
I
think?
think we've kind of heard from Michelle and Lily. Was there anything on your list, Bryce, that you'd want to talk through? That we could just-
I don't think so at the moment. No.
Okay.
I think at least going through like the rest of this stuff, I'm like sufficiently curious enough about, and I think will help me. I don't know. Yeah, I think it'll be good.
Okay. Oh, well, the one thing I should say is like I noticed, I don't know if you have your GitHub integration for your playground yet. So you should be able to start. Let me see. Let's do that before we go too much further.
I have some of them. I may not have done it on like prod or not.
Have you been able to publish to GitHub yet from the playground?
No,
I think
actually,
on the
I haven't done
subject
that
lab
side yet.
team.
Actually,
I don't think.
So if you want, I can link you to the tutorial document that steps through it pretty like in with some good fine-grained detail.
So Bryce, let me add you to the LitLab team first. I don't think I've done that yet. What is your GitHub username?
Bryce.Stephen.Willie.
And is it how do you spell?
Oh wait, sorry. No dots. My GitHub is no dots. That was my email.
Oh, okay.
Bad.
I guess I could invite you from your email too. Okay.
Yeah,
got it.
that works.
All right.
Yeah, so I have GitHub at least on the test server. I have GitHub integration set up.
Okay.
But yeah, maybe it's just because I don't have access to the team yet that maybe I get other things that I'm just not aware of.
Okay. All right. So I invited you, so you'll be able to join that in a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. So I think we could take 10 minutes to like think big picture, Lily. So yeah, if you want to share your screen, we can look at that document.
Okay.
We'll try to go through some of the other items and touch them at least a little bit and flesh out some of those notes.
Okay. I just want to come back to this picture. And the reason I think this is important is that if we're taking this approach, then we start a new base before we make new changes. That way, the sooner we get this new base started, the sooner we can use this new base to generate interviews. I think I used the wrong word for this thing. I should just say where we are now, which is 3 repository, and where we want to be is this should not be called wizard. Let's call it something else. Let's just call it assembly line. So It's a brand new repository, and in it we're going to have wizard.
It's an interesting idea to start a new repository for the new code.
Right.
Definitely no harm in doing that I can think of. So
That's what assembly line non-MA is, right? This is what we're talking about.
well, no matter
Right.
what.
So this one we'll rename something as something else.
We don't have no. This one doesn't currently exist at all.
Right.
That's one that we're planning to make. This was my understanding of what this was. That's what I was referring to when I was referring to this.
Great. Then
You
we're
can just cross it,
alike.
delete
So
it
that's
completely.
great.
Just delete it.
Yeah.
It doesn't stay here confusing.
So this is putting everything in one place, which is we have discussed the advantages of it. It's easy to present it to the third party. It's easy for version control and maintenance, all that, expansion, all that. But now I do remember Quentin brought up a critical question about what about performance with the wizard, because basically it does two things. One is the wizard which generates interviews. One is the basic question, all the other things which are supporting at the runtime of all these interviews views that are generated by the wizard. So would they affect each other's performance in terms of the traffic? I'm thinking we can look at it from two aspects. One is that those files, the files in wizard and the files in the other pile, they are virtually non-interactive. So in a sense, people visit those pages separately. So I think the impact is probably small. And secondly, how many people are using the wizard versus how many people are running the interviews that are generated? It's probably a very small percentage of people who are using the wizard.
Actually, all the people who have been doing the interviews have been using the wizard to make them.
You're
run
talking about people who run the interviews,
in the
right?
beginning, but after that, they are basically using the basic questions, not the wizard part anymore. So in terms of the functionality, we're doing wizard, we're doing runtime support, And these two functions don't interact. Therefore, their visitors do not run into each other. So to my mind, I'm thinking the impact of the performance of each other probably is not big.
Are you thinking like the speed that it runs? When you say
Right.
Yeah.
I think the last time you were thinking about if we put two things into the same bucket, would they reduce the performance?
Oh, I don't remember that, but yeah, I don't think it will be a big barrier either way.
Okay.
There's a chance, I suppose. Yeah, but I don't think it would affect the speed that it runs.
Okay, good. All right, so then after this, I actually created a Excel file that I put together all the. I actually
great.
physically
Great.
merged those one in my playground, and it runs. You make very minimum changes, it runs. So this first top one is the merge of these three repositories, and I just colored them. And then I'm proposing that we can go through some renaming and merging of files. These are details. And after that, we can get into a nicer.
Could you link that to us? That's
That
really
way.
amazing.
And then we can even further rename it in a very explicit way so that we can separate the wizard from what I'm looking at. I think it as the engine. That's the core. Basically, that's the core system of the assembly line system. Because at the beginning, I just thought that assembly line as a project. I think from the technical point of view, it gave birth to the system, which we can call it assembly line. And it does two things. One is generate the interview as the starting point, and then it supports all the interviews that are generated. So we can, in a sense, view it as an engine. That's why I propose to name it that way. But anyway, so that's my whole thing here. I don't think we have time to go through it in details, but that's basically what I wanted to brought up.
A lot of amazing work.
Yeah, thank you for doing such a comprehensive documentation of this. This is great.
All right, then I'll move the file to our shared folder, and then
yeah. I mean, I do like the way that you've categorized everything, Lily, but I think we're probably gonna. I think it makes sense to keep the runtime stuff separate from the wizard part in different repositories. So that way, when you install, if you just want to run an interview someone else made, you're going to definitely need the runtime package. But if you're not authoring your own interviews, you don't, from scratch, you never need the wizard package. So I think keeping those separate makes sense to me.
Okay, so
and you really nicely labeled what the different functionalities are. I think those still deserve their own separate repositories is my thought.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's great. And then basically this lines up really well with what we were talking about, because then the one other thing we have is the state specific. I'm just editing in the, see someone else is in the same line. Runtime code. The question is is there state specific wizard code that we want to have as well? How do we manage that piece of things? I don't think it's a big problem for us to worry about right now, but the code it generates is kind of particular to our project right now. Some of it's okay, you include your own basic questions and everything just works. But some of the stuff like the top level categories, the list of courts that you get to pick when you're doing it the first time, those are so specific to our project.
Yeah.
We have to decide, do we want to keep it that opinionated? Do we want to let people drop in their own file with their opinionated list of preferences and have their own version of the wizard for each state? Or do we want to figure out a different way to handle the things that were customized in the wizard and say, we actually don't care about those being set when you generate the form. I mean, one thing that happens is people do tend to make mistakes there the first time. And so it may not be that important that we get it right at the beginning, because they're often having to go back in and edit things anyway.
For the courts, yeah.
The courts are the one big thing, because people don't always know what courts different cases can be heard in, even though they should. And that's like an explicit step on our checklist in Trello. They don't always get that right.
Yeah, I mean, we could just have a placeholder that says, you know, that offers an access to a data structure for a file that people can include for their own state or country or whatever.
Yeah, I'm wondering like how do you configure that?
It basically describes the shape of the data and what the shape of the data will need to be, and then they can drop in data that is shaped that way. It seems a little prescriptive, but I mean, the whole thing is prescriptive. So
yeah, and then that's, I think, the big time saving things. The question is,
do we know enough
do we
about
care?
the structure that other court data would need to be in order to be able to use that? Like, do we feel we have the domain knowledge required to set up
For other states you're talking about?
Yeah, for other states or other countries or stuff like that, that we would say, okay, this data structure we know is probably sufficient for states and other countries, right? Like,
I would say we shouldn't get too prescriptive there. So,
okay.
Because in Massachusetts, we have 7 trial court departments and divisions, rather. No, I was getting mixed up.
So what I would see is like offering a data structure that would let people put in divisions. But the question is,
No, we don't know that they're divided into divisions and departments for sure.
Okay.
And then the question is like, is that the right distinct division? For some states, it wouldn't be, because they don't have statewide forms. So in our state, we have like, okay, there's the higher level court, there's the lower level court, there's the municipal courts, which are kind of their own special thing, but they're the equivalent to the district courts. And in other states, they might have forms that you can only use in a handful of courts, even though they're the same level as other courts that don't allow you to use that exact same form that does the same thing. We're way more standardized in Massachusetts than some other states are, amazingly. We're one of the places we're better. So.
Okay, good to be aware of, good to think about.
So they may not even want you to have that whole concept of selecting the courts you can file in as a limit. Hey, Luke.
Hey, Luke. Another thing that I would like to, not related to that data structure, that I'd like to put into the mix is adding where the testing framework and integration fits in that chart and in those spreadsheets. And maybe that's something you and I can talk about more, Lily, at a separate time if you want to get together. But like, right now I feel like testing is like the child that lives in the closet that no one ever talks about, and I'm not sure what's going on there. Which if it doesn't fit into the project, then that's okay, but it'd be good for me to know moving forward. You know?
What do you mean by that? I mean, we obviously need testing. Do you mean like
like, is the format in which I am preparing, is the format that I am constructing for the testing, is that going to be usable for is the plan to make that usable for other, like for the assembly line projects in general, or have I just been kind of writing per repository as it comes up? I realize I never like established that, or maybe I just don't remember it.
We can, yeah, if you have like so I feel like it's definitely been your bailiwick, and I'm pleased to see it happening. There's not a lot I can contribute to it. But if you have some things that are like questions that you think we need to discuss and make decisions about and formalize, then we should bring those up. Yeah.
Okay. I might try to put something together then, because
it
might be useful to have. I understand like the writing of it is something that I'm more familiar with than other people here. But like what the needs are is something that I think I'm less familiar with.
Okay. let's add
Like,
that
yeah,
to our agenda for next week. So I think we
Okay.
have a lot for this week, but that seems like a good thing to talk about.
okay.
All right. So Luke, we were just talking about like top level categorization of files. I think we ran into our 10-minute limit there. But
Yes.
do we have action items that would help us move this forward for our next meeting?
I think we should, whoever can, take a look at those spreadsheets and see what we think of the arrangement of the files and the names. And if we have different ideas, how should we express them? Should we make a copy of the file and make our own version, or just new sheets in the same thing with our name appended to them? Or like, how do we give feedback on that?
Yeah, Lily, do you have a response to Michelle's question? I think those are great questions.
Sorry, I didn't catch it. Could you say it again?
Sure, no worries. So the spreadsheets in there look fantastic. They also look really detailed and like something we might want to each like get a chance to think about and see if we have thoughts on how they might be different. So how do we like participate in the creation of that material? I think it wouldn't work to just, everybody edit in whatever way they want. So do we want each person to create their own sheet that they
No.
do their own version in? Do they create their own file? Like there's some things that are not, like comments are not sufficient for. Like if you want to try, rearranging a bunch of things, like how's that going to happen?
Right. That's why I was hoping that if we had time today, we could discuss, we go through it after we all agreed with it, and then we enter it. But we don't have that time, so we
Well,
may.
I think there's some like sitting and thinking to be done. Like,
Yes, that's true. That's very true. That's very true.
And for me, I'm going to have to move stuff around in order to be able to see what that looks like. So do I just make a copy of the spreadsheet and with my name on it, that's just like my brainstorming that I can do anything I want in, or like what does that look like?
So I'm thinking maybe after I move this one, you can make a copy, but don't put into the shared folder.
Can I just put my name on it?
Then when we go through discussion, when we have time, when we go through discussion, you show yours, and then we discuss. If we say, okay, we agree with that, and then you go to this one in the shared folder and make that change. Does that work?
Can I make one that's in the shared folder that just has my name on it so that it's differentiated very clearly from the other one? It'll start with my name so that if I get hit by a bus, it will be accessible to other people.
No, you can add a link to the agenda file, but
okay,
to keep
that works.
the folder clean, it's better to just keep.
I like that idea, Lily. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. So we have a next step, and I think you're right. I like what your point about, like the more earlier we decide those things, the more we can start preparing. And I see the January as like a good transition point for us to start using this. So I like the idea. Maybe we can set aside 30 minutes or so at the next meeting to just go through it in that detail.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. I'm going to jump around a little bit to figure out how to use our next 30 minutes. But this might be a quick one. So the question about how the court object works is it's very tied to Massachusetts. So if someone were to want to create their own state's library of courts, they would just try to create the same interface. They wouldn't really be able to reuse much of the code that it has, nor necessarily should they.
So not even the way that yeah, like from what you described, not even the way that stuff is being accessed in there. There could be something really basic like the court finder, like not necessarily how do you get the courts close to there, but like it takes someone's address and it displays a map, right? It gives access to the map display and lets the coder decide how to populate that. Like, because I think that's something that people don't like, learning the Google API and stuff. It would be great for people to not have to do that. and to
Well,
still have that kind of
you don't have to.
access.
You don't have to do that. So all I'm doing is just using DocAssemble's built-in way to display a map. Let me take a quick peek at
Okay, is it
that
much?
was custom.
Is it
That
much
shows
less
like all the points
integration?
on one map. Let's take a quick look at that and see if we can figure it out. I don't remember it being very complicated, but
Okay, if it's just a map, if it already has a, like you put address in here, it's just yours is like it puts a bunch of points there and then it adds a radio list at the bottom, right? That has all the names and then also a drop down list of all the other courts. Like there's pieces of it that I feel are,
yeah, but those aren't part of the courts library. That part isn't. The part that adds a list of points is. So it's just here. So combine this method could be abstracted, but it's not actually not a method. It's a standalone function. It takes a list of addresses and combines them into one map. And it uses some fuzziness there in the geo coordinates, just because the latitude, longitude points that we got from mass.gov were really random. They were like, it was the same address, the same building, but it was off by like a couple of significant digits.
okay.
I made it fuzzier, but I consider it to be the same address.
Right. So I think what I'm trying to express is that there is some functionality that I see in the current interaction with courts, with whatever, right? Here it's with addresses, but from the surface, it appears like it is an interaction with what's going on with the courts that I think could be abstracted, and it looks like this one could be like really easily abstracted. And so maybe worth thinking about what part of the courts would be abstractable. But yeah, you have a much deeper knowledge of that data structure. So maybe what I describe as belonging to court code or court functionality is not something you consider belonging to that functionality.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you implemented your own class with most of the same methods, that would probably be the right way to do it. And this happens to store a whole list of courts in each answer file, which is actually not so great from a database usage point of view and memory usage on the server point of view. That's the big thing. I was like, oh, I don't know if I would have designed it the same way. And it also has the functionality to create those JSON files is also part of this, which isn't something you would need to re-implement. I mean, that's very particular to
That's
like
very specific,
one web page in the world. And then it's not even something we're using anymore because that data source was just so messy. That I will never rescrape their site again.
So maybe we should slate some of these files or some of this stuff for deletion, not the file, but like the functionality in there.
I think that's fine. I mean, I don't see it as really high value to like refactor this, but if someone just created their own court list and they had it implement the same methods as the MA court, and it stored the same data, that would really be all you would need to be able to be kind of a drop-in replacement for MA courts, in my opinion. And then like that combined maps, that's like a standalone functionality that we can copy over. I mean, right now we're not talking about like trying to represent every court in the country. So I don't see a lot of value in cleaning up this code that works, in my opinion. It's
just to take out the stuff that like you don't need to look at anymore because it's not being used at all, that when someone's reading through the file, they don't need to worry about what that does. But that's separate. Sorry, that's getting off what this topic is.
I mean, it's not irrelevant. I question how much time it's worth dedicating to it, but to solve that.
Sure.
But that's all.
So
it's like I don't think it would really help someone recreate that API, which is only like a couple of methods. So that they would need, like it needs to have an address object, it needs to have a location object, and then whatever metadata that you want to store about the court, it's up to you what metadata you want us to use, really. And then I can't imagine you would even use the same YAML question for the court selector, because we have stuff in there that's specific to Massachusetts, and it would be for every state. And the parameters in which you can choose a court might be completely different. Like in some states, you might not have multiple forums for the same type of case. So you might not want to give people choices. You might say, hey, this is the court that you can file in. This is the only court.
Yeah, I mean, okay, if
shouldn't-
what we have now there isn't anything reusable in it, and we don't want to develop something that is more comprehensive, then yeah, you know?
It's representing nationwide courts is such a big ontological challenge.
That's not what I mean, but I don't know that now is the time to get into that, because there isn't that much time.
What I mean is that the scope of what we would do to try to make it more abstracted is so big that I would say a better approach might just be, and it really is, ultimately, you're like, okay, how can we represent courts in a way that's consistent across different states? It's not an easy problem. So I'd rather just say, like, let's do this kind of the same thing, learning a little bit of the lessons from scratch in another state, rather than worrying about trying to sync up the way that the two different states do things. Other than like have an API for accessing the information about that one court, that seems pretty translatable across jurisdictions. But even if you wanted to redo it a completely different way, it wouldn't really be the end of the world. It's not so tightly coupled that it would cause problems. And then the variation between 5 states that you picked at random might be quite high, that trying to move up that abstraction ladder would end up not saving you so much time. Like, you'd be way over engineering what you wanted to build. That's my point. Not that we would try to solve the problem all at once, but even like moving from 1 state to 2 states might not end up having enough similarity to worry about changing the code in the existing state.
Okay, I meant a more general data structure, but maybe that would not be useful. So that's fine.
That's exactly what I'm saying wouldn't be.
Not a data structure, sorry, not a data structure, functionality, more generalized functionality. I like you, it sounds like you know the problem, so I think there's no point in arguing about it. Sounds good.
Okay. So let's see, we have 3, this week we kind of tackled, and we're going to revisit, just move that into the right order. Let's see, data import export. Bryce, you were saying you might be interested in starting to do some work on, or exploring at least a little bit of it.
Yes.
And the AL document class I've started working on, thanks to a lot of pre-work that you did, Luke, which was quite helpful. I know that you were feeling like you weren't sure, but it really was, like, all the discussions that we had and the work thought that you did into it was great. This is a new topic, which might be just like a quick UI check. I don't know. Let's actually jump into that one. All right, so I'll just show you what I was doing here with this. And just get some thoughts from folks here. And hopefully people have enough context to understand the thing I'm trying to solve, but I'm happy to slow down and explain more. People have questions that I'm just glossing over, but all right, so here's the basic problem. You have this template, like let's take this one, for example, here, which I've just been playing around with as a test. You want to be able to handle the people that we already have talked about and pre-planned in the assembly line project, which is like a list of like 10 different objects that are variables that represent people's names, or a type of relationship to the case, rather. So we have like users, other parties. Then we have a handful of other types of relationships, like witness, attorney, and so on. But what if you have a spot for a dedicated person on the form that is not one of those pre-named roles, and it's not like a user It's not like another party. Like you can't reuse one of the labels. So like a really example that came up early from one of our students this semester was decedent. They were doing an estate, trust and estate form. So decedent's the person who died. They're obviously not filing the case to probate their estate, but their information goes on the form in a standardized way. So let's say I'm doing the first trust and estates form project. I add that label in there and I'm using some of the features of an object, of the person object. Question is, how do we detect that? If they're using attributes or methods that are specific to people, that's one easy way to do it. If they're not, it's harder. But my thought is if someone runs this form through the wizard and we haven't pre-said, hey, that's a reserved label representing the person who died, because we didn't have any forms that used that form, that topic before. We want to have some way to have the interview prompt them for that and let them use that in their actual generated interview later. Because what I've seen is that when people don't do that, or if they use a different, more specific label when they didn't really need to, we can try to get people to fix that problem before they run it through the wizard. Sometimes we'll need to add new stuff because there's no existing concept. Sometimes they could have used an existing concept, but they didn't, and maybe their way is clearer. So we really shouldn't force them into our way of doing it. So I think giving them a chance to say, hey, this is a person, use address fields for that person, use the name field with the 4 parts of name for that person, will really save a lot of frustration and energy for that person who's working on the form.
So basically allow them to add a person to the form. Is that what we're saying? Like a person, an individual, a VC individual to the form?
Yeah, although I think a question is whether we should think about it as being an individual or we should always force it to be a list of people. It's a question too.
Yeah, I like it.
So I've done that code here.
I think the list of people is more consistent. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be more consistent. There might be chances where that's, at least they can see existing code and model it on that code without having to really think it through as much. I also thought of, this is a new concept that we're not handling yet, but for the court selector, we've noticed there are a number of places where we had an assumption everything's a court form and it's either starting a case or responding to a case. But there's actually a lot more gradations. So I've started to try to put those abstractions in a little bit more.
Yeah, that was my question about, like, when you said, what is the other side of the party? And then you said there's always another side of the party. That was kind of what I was trying to ask.
I don't
Right.
really know what you're talking about, or think we have to revisit that, whatever it was.
Okay, well, what I'm trying to ask is, does that apply as well to that question about, is there another?
Michelle,
Okay.
let's table that discussion. If you want to ask a question about it later, that's okay.
Okay, I thought it was the same discussion. I apologize.
Okay. So this is what it does right now, is it looks through and says, did you use any variables, any attributes or methods that are associated with people? And if so, it gives you like a list here of the people, the objects that look like the names rather, that look like they were intended to be referencing a person. And you can just say, yep, that's a person. I think probably we could say we're going to default those all to being checked. And then this is a place where I was getting stuck, which is how do you, another problem that people have run into, which is changing the kind of question that gets asked when there's only one of these people instead of multiple. And that I really am stuck on. Oh, a good way to ask this question. So I think we want to have this map to each of these groups, right? Like users, decedents in this case.
So I think
Something like how many can there be?
Yeah, my thought for this, but it didn't sound like I didn't understand the problem with it before, but was to say like, how do you know a set number of, is there only going to be, like, do you know the set number? Is there only going to be a set number of this type of person, right? And if so, how many? Like if there's only going to be one witness, then they can say there is only going to be one, right? And then it would create the code that makes it only one with the wizard.
Yeah, exactly. That's the question. And so the challenge is like, how do we present the question to people in a way that makes sense? The functionality is exactly what you described. Like we ask them how many of that type of object are there going to be? Do we want to get into the level of there's 2, there's 3? Or do we want to?
I think it's worth doing that until we hear otherwise, because I think people find it very confusing to do in code. So I think if the code is there for them, they can use it or change it, but then they're not trying to find how to do it without any kind of reference for how to look for it. Like right now, people get there and they don't know.
This is a how, not a why question.
So you said, do we want to try to do this? And my answer is, I think we should try to do this.
You didn't hear my whole question. My question
I apologize.
was, how do we let them say a specific number, or do we give them a choice between 1 and unlimited? So it's like, what is the switching point for them really? Do we need to say, because every click you give somebody, it slows them down, right? And it gets them it makes it harder for them to get to their endpoint, which is getting to download the running thing.
Mm-hmm. We could have a question that said, do you know the number of insert here that there will be every single time?
Okay, so that is one way to do it. Do you know the number? Do you think, so let's go through that. So let's say you have 5 different people on your form. Does that mean 3 clicks for each?
That's a good question.
And then how do you phrase the question?
So
A good question.
I'm thinking, so because how many people are going to use this form, and then if they say 5, so okay, you say person 1. My idea is this: you give them a list of possible type of roles that they can choose from for each person who is involved in this form, and if the role is not on that list, is it possible to give a variable that they can enter? They say, okay, this is the type, this is the role, which is not on the drop-down list for me. So, but this is the role, and it's like we create a placeholder for that field name for the type or role, and then we also have code that accept the questions that are associated with that variable role. I know it's challenging. Then you preset and say, okay, this is 100 roles, and I have coded everything for it. But I think as more people are using this to create forms, it's always there always will come up with new scenarios we cannot anticipate beforehand. I think back a month or 2 ago, we had some kind of discussion in this meeting that we were discussing about, okay, can we add a variable name that is something that we accept the input instead of we pre-name it. I think we had some initial discussion, but not in details. But this, I think, is a concrete case where we can consider this approach that we don't have, we cannot come 100% beforehand. So therefore, we leave a dynamic kind of approach. So we allow people enter the role, and we accept whatever the consequence of that is, and handle it in the code.
Yeah, so that's right. So Lily, this is a way to get to that. So we talked about a bunch of different options. One was to let people type the options in for the names that they wanted to use. And this is an approach that I'm trying to take, which is just like scanning the template and seeing if the way that they've named the variables in the template, it does work for a PDF or a docx file. If that's following our conventions or DocAssemble's conventions for being a person or a list of people. So they don't have to type in the interview that these are the people that I want to work with. But my main question is like, what do we think about how you can ask somebody for your limit to the number of this type of person?
So I don't love show ifs and especially not nested show ifs, but one option is to have, it would be separate clicks for each of these. There would be a show if under users that would say, you know, is there a set number of users each time? And if they say yes to that, then it would ask how many. So it would just expand.
Oh, so you're thinking move the question after you check, yes, we have that person in the
Yeah.
form. Okay.
So it would be right under there.
And we would really not want to pre-check any of the boxes in that case, I assume, right? Because that would be very hard to track which ones go with which.
Yeah. Also, can we filter out the ones that we already know are like users, for example, or plaintiffs or defendants?
Yeah, because they would conflict with other choices. So yes, I think that is something we could do.
Okay.
But we still would, let's say they had 5 of the pre-canned people, then we'd still have a usability issue there. If those are, or how do you ask those follow-up questions for that kind of role?
Can you do like a table kind of display on the screen where you have 5 columns where you have the row for number 1, for person number 1, row for person number 2, some kind of checkbox, then they can just click. So you don't have separate questions, so you just have that one big block, something.
I think that's a good idea. I think tables will be some code in DocAssemble. So I think that might be challenging to implement, but the UI is interesting. I wonder if there's a way to do that in a linear format that wouldn't require custom code. Ideas about that. Well, anyway, I mean, maybe it's challenging to go into too much detail on this. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to rush people a little bit. I don't mean to do that. But here's the idea, and we only have a couple minutes left. So maybe we could, this is really helpful for me starting to think through this. I appreciate everyone's thoughts so far. Sounds like people like the idea of having this feature. A couple of good ideas about how to start the UI for it. Sounds like going through person by person is what makes the sense rather than grouping it by question. It seems like for most people, right? We could do a mix, I suppose. We have one top level question like this, and then we go through user by user after that, or person by person after.
No, I think go through person together for it's better than go one person and then go into questions. I mean, from the coder's point of view, who is going to work on this interview afterwards?
I think it somewhat depends on, like, as always, our target audience. Is it people that are just starting with this stuff, or are we expecting people to, like, because the wizard's something that's used, so, or at least the way I've seen it happen is in a very, like, people use it once, like students, right? A lot of our audience right now is students. And like, I don't know, something more guided for people who are going to use it once and going to have something that's harder to understand and are not going to get to a place of understanding with it is, I think, more useful. If our vision for this is for people who are going to use it a lot, then something less guided seems fine. I think it can all be on one page if it's also guided. Does that make sense?
You said it can be or it can't be.
Can,
Yeah.
like with the show ifs or
Right.
with these in separate sections or something. Maybe asking the questions a little differently in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I hadn't really, when I wrote this, I was like feeling like this is not the right way to ask it, but I'm not sure yet how. I tried like one other phrasing of it.
Mhm.
So, well, I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, how often do you think there's more than one or exactly one? Or how often is it like there are exactly two and we know they're exactly two?
I definitely know
One or
we're
more.
exactly one.
Yeah, I think the exactly one happens a lot. And I think that the exactly two, I haven't seen that happen yet. In a situation where there wouldn't be better off using different variables instead of trying to use a list for two different unrelated types of things.
I mean, in
And
that
this
case,
is a hard question to, sorry. It's hard to phrase this though, like more than one user. Like that concept of the user feels like a little amorphous. I mean something specific by it, but it's hard to convey.
I mean, one thing you can do is, again, a show if under users that says, how many users do you think, how many users do you know will be on this form? And it would go, and there would be like one and more than one. It'd be radio buttons.
Yeah, I kind of like the one and more than one as the two choices. Okay, so it's good to hear that confirmed. But I think the question, like, how do you phrase users is hard. I'll let you know what I work on, but if people have ideas, I'd love to hear them too.
How do you phrase users? What do you mean? Sorry.
I have to go, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. All right. We can next time.
So what I mean by that though is the user of a form.
Is it about the word users specifically, or is it about insert person?
What's the context that limits the scope of a user is the question.
Oh, so, that is a whole other, like, right?
No, you're interrupted me, I think, before you know what I mean. What I mean is like, do you mean in the world, can only one person ever use this form? Do you mean only one person can be sitting down at the computer and using it at once? Do you mean that only one person's information can go on the form? Those are all concepts that seem to map onto user in my mind, but that are not easy to convey in one word.
Sure. So I have like I have thoughts about that, but you don't have time. So maybe that's something we can pick up next time.
Yeah, if people have ideas and want to write them down or think through, it'll be great. And I just have this meeting. I actually don't have a link for it yet, so I'm going to just send an email out asking for it.
So Quentin, is this still a good time for you, or do you want to switch to a different time so it's easier for you?
Yeah, it's going to have to be later because I do have to sign off. I'm just going to
I don't mean today, I mean in general.
I could have time later today. And I also want to do the data import export and get Bryce or whoever else is interested in that started and share like what I had learned and found existing code. You really don't have to do so much of it from scratch. So I'm happy to set up some time for that later.
Okay.
I'll be around on Slack. This meeting should only take like a half hour. I'm going to try to just be coding most of this.
Is this channel open right now, or is it?
You want to stay on this Zoom?
I mean, I want to ask if where other people are at, and if there are other stuff people want to discuss. So
All right, I'm going to sign off, but I can make Michelle. I can make you the host. So
Thanks.
I'll see you all later.
All right. See you later, Clinton. Good luck.
Bye.